Alrighty, I'm back. Hello.
For authors, filmmakers,
Hello.
entertainment, and all your listening needs.
He's doing the
Listen
intro.
now to Talk Now Radio, where no topic is taboo.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talk Now Radio. This is your host, Royce, the Redneck Radio Man. Joining me today is going to be Adam Gorightly and Ron Patton. And Adam Gorightly is the author of about 3 or 4 conspiracy books, one of them being Happy Trails to Weird Places, I believe, if I got the title correctly. And then Ron Patton owns Paranoia Magazine, which is a very popular magazine here on the internet that is very easy to find. It's full of actually a bunch of information. And in all honesty, Adam Gorightly writes articles for Ron's magazine, in fact, and we're going to talk about some of their conspiracy theories that they've investigated and they wrote about. And I'm going to try to see if we can find out what's the newest word in the world of conspiracy today. So, Ron, Adam, how are y'all doing today?
Real good, Royce. Thanks for having us.
Well, I want to thank you guys for coming on to the show. In fact, Adam, I'll be honest, I was a little bit slow getting around to asking you. You friended me on Facebook, I think some 3-4 years ago, and I'm just now getting around to asking you. So,
asking you on the show. Gotcha.
Well, I do apologize for that. I just, I have so many guests coming and going, and I stay so far booked into advance that I don't have a lot of time to, invite a lot of extra people, in other words.
Hey, no problem.
So, at any rate, Ron, why don't you tell us real quick how you come about being the new owner of Paranoia Magazine and what led you to buy it and where you're going with it?
Well, I used to write for Paranoia several years ago, probably back in 1996. I have a friend by the name of Wendy Wallace who wrote a few articles for Paranoia, and she, sent me the magazine. I think this was like in the mid-90s, and I was just blown away. I'm going, wow, this is real conspiracy stuff. And, of course, they also have paranormal articles as well. But anyway, I sort of off and on wrote for Paranoia, and I have a really good rapport with Joan DeArc and Al Haddell, the former owners of Paranoia. And actually, in 2009, they quit printing the hard copy magazine. As you well know, hard copy magazines are sort of like a dinosaur. They're just, many are falling by the wayside, in lieu of what's going on with the internet and the e-magazines, the digital format magazines. So anyway, they quit printing in 2009, and then they started putting out books, sort of on-demand books. And, I decided, what the heck, I was going to take a shot at putting out my own conspiracy magazine, and I was going to call it Conspirazine. And so I think this was back in 2011, I messaged Joan and said, hey, I was wondering if I could buy your mailing list because I want to put out a conspiracy magazine. And there were a few out like in the 90s. There was Steam Shovel Press and, a few others, but, like I said, they quit printing. So anyway, I just thought, wow, there's a niche for this kind of information. So Joan said, hey, well, why don't you just buy us out, since we're not really doing anything with it. And, they already have name recognition. They're pretty well known throughout the world. So I said, well, how much you want to sell it for? And they gave me a price, and I said, I think I can handle that. And the rest is history. So basically, I took over officially in October 2011, and then I put out my first issue in summer of 2012, and so far I've put out 6 issues, I believe. And they used to come out 3 times a year, and now I'm going quarterly, so they come out 4 times a year.
Now, are you putting out hardcover or just e-format? Oh,
no, hard copy magazines. And I am working, there are a few e-magazines online right now, but it's a little time-consuming to reformat some of those. So that's a big project that I'm working on right now with Olaf Phillips, who's one of my writers, and he's owner of anomalies.net. So anyway, he's going to help with that part of paranoia. And then I'll also be, in 2014, I hope to be publishing some books as well.
I think the only people I can think of off the top of my head doing what you're doing would be you and Nexus magazine. I don't know if you're familiar with them or not.
Oh, yeah, Duncan Rhodes, Yep, he's a friend of mine. And he is putting out, I believe, a hard copy magazine now and then, but I don't know if it's on a regular basis. But I know that he has a really nice e-magazine, online magazine. And the problem with Nexus is just the mailing cost is exceedingly high. So there's a lot of distributors here in the United States that just don't want to carry Nexus.
Is that because he's overseas?
Yeah, he's in Australia, and for whatever reason, the mailing cost is really high from Australia. So, yeah.
Right. Well, that makes a lot of sense. I know he's got a huge repository on his website because I used to go there and read it almost every day. Matter of fact, I've checked out yours quite a few times too.
Yeah, and actually I'm going to be, my website hasn't been updated in a while. Olaf was doing that, as well as Rob Davenport from Conspiracy HQ, but they've just been so busy. They got regular jobs like a lot of us do. And so I just got a new webmaster who's going to be taking over this week, and so I'm going to be trying to post articles at least every other day, and I'm really going to be beefing up my e-store, not only with some of the back issues of Paranoia, but also of books from Trine Day Press and also books from the Book Tree here in San Diego. So probably within another month, it'll be quite a bit different. And so I'm really thankful for this person, Tracy from Portland, taking over the reins and helping me out with my website. And, another thing, Royce, I wanted to let you know, I recently opened up a conspiracy store here in San Diego. So I believe it's the only conspiracy store on the West Coast.
Sounds excellent. We're at in San Diego, is it exactly?
It's right smack dab in the middle of downtown. So, it's not a very large store.
Location.
Oh, yeah. It's not a big store. It's sort of like in a micro mall. I have an artist who does kinetic or mechanical art right next to me, and then there's a massage therapist and holistic counselor and a tailor and seamstress. So it's sort of an eclectic crowd here. But, there's a good buzz going on. There's a lot of people really interested in what I have. And, again, it's small. It's only about 120 square feet, but, I sell magazines, and not just Paranoia, but also, I have New Dawn, a few Nexus, Open Minds, InfoWars, and I also used to publish a magazine, about 10 years ago called MK Zine, which examined coercive mind control and invasive human experimentation.
It sounds like it was a takeoff from MK Ultra.
Exactly, yeah. And so that's where a lot of my research was into, is CIA mind control. And so, yeah, books, magazines, bumper stickers. I have conspiracy cards. I also sell Fate magazine. And then my good friend, who Adam knows, Greg Carlwood from the Higher Side Chats podcast, he also he designs and he prints conspiracy T-shirts. So I also sell those as well.
Oh, that sounds cool. So what are you selling of Adams?
God, what the heck do I have here? I don't know. I got something. I'm sure I have something of Adams somewhere. Actually, it's at, I have a couple of his books. I have like a big bookshelf over at the Book Tree off Adams Avenue here in San Diego. And,
off my avenue? Cool.
What's that?
You said off Adams Avenue. It's my avenue, yes.
There you go. His avenue. But actually, Paul Tice, owner of the Book Tree, and he's also written for Paranoia magazine, it has sort of like a metaphysical, paranormal UFO type bookstore. It's really neat. And so we work together, and so I have a lot of his books here. Oh, and then I also have a few of Andy Colvin's books, The Mothman Photographer. So, yeah, quite a selection.
Prophecies?
Yes, yeah.
Cool. So, Adam, what's new up in your world? What do you got in the way of books going on down there?
The most recent book you mentioned was Happy Trails to High Weirdness, a conspiracy theorist tour guide, which came out. It's been out for a while, about a year and a half, 2 years, and I'm working on a whole slew of different book projects are in the works. So always, a lot going on. Just recently launched a website, historiadiscordia.com. And this has to do with a Discordian archives project I'm working on that, the explanation of all this gets quite involved, but it has to do with a fellow named Kerry Thornley and Greg Hill that started a spoof religion way back when that influenced, inspired the Illuminatus trilogy by Robert Anton Wilson and Robert Shea. So that is kind of in a nutshell on that project. I could go into a lot of depth, but working on that project, and there's several books involved with that. And still writing on and off for Paranoia. I was going to mention, I think I'm the most published author in Paranoia, and I've kind of lost track how many articles, around 13 or so, going back to the olden days when the magazine was launched back in the early 90s, when it was a zine before it was a slick magazine. It was among some of those early zines that people were putting out. Ron mentioned Steam Shovel Press, and there was a few others back in the day, and this was before the internet really got going. That's where a lot of the information was exchanged back in the day. And I think I wrote, had an article in the third issue, then over the years continued to work with them, and to most recently I had an article a couple issues back on the dead comedian conspiracy, looking into all the mysterious, perhaps conspiratorial deaths of a lot of comedians over the years.
Now that would be kind of weird. Why would anybody have a conspiracy to kill a comedian of all people?
Well, you look at it, and what do the really good comedians do, like the George Carlins or the Bill Hicks?
I know George Carlin. I saw some of his last shows, and he dealt a whole lot with conspiracy toward the end.
Sure, and a lot of comedians have been on the cutting edge, a threat to the status quo, going back to Lenny Bruce in the 60s, there was certainly some curiosities surrounding his death. And at the time of his death, he was, really waging a battle for, freedom of speech and whatnot, much like George Carlin did in later years. Somebody like Bill Hicks as well,
wow,
who was popular in the 80s. He was a critic of the first Persian Gulf War and Bush, and succumbed at a very young age to pancreatic cancer just as he was becoming popular. So I list a lot of, in the article, a lot of comedians. Another one was Freddie Prinze, of all people, who supposedly committed suicide. He was, at the time of his death, he was looking into the JFK and RFK and assassinations, and was going to do a national telethon to raise awareness and money to reopen the JFK and RFK investigations. This was in the mid to late 70s, and during that period also died under pretty curious circumstances. So there's a whole list of comedians I write about in this article that died once again under somewhat curious circumstances.
Well, I did an interview here a few years back with Lana Tobin and Max Tobin, and they told me, according to them, this, of course, they can't verify this, but they said that they were channeling Michael Jackson, or they were friends with somebody who was, and they were writing the information on it, I think would be more accurate. Mm-hmm. And supposedly, he was actually killed because he was about to reveal some of what was going on in the form of his songs, in other words.
Right. And do you hear that with, the deaths in a lot of artists, that there are those rumors and stories surrounding them, such as Michael Jackson and even Whitney Houston. I heard similar stories that they were taken out for a reason.
But finding out if this is really factual is where it gets tricky.
When it's somebody getting the information where they're channeling it, it's kind of hard to substantiate that.
The sort of thing you wouldn't doubt, but yet you can't prove.
Right.
Let's say maybe you might doubt, but you wouldn't surprise. You might be more accurate.
So yeah, if it's channeled information somebody is getting, then to verify that, somebody will need to dig into it much deeper.
Well, tell me, Adam.
Royce, to dovetail on that, a few years ago, Alex Constantine put out a book called The Covert War on Rock, and so it was extremely detailed in relation to some of the people in the entertainment business, namely rock stars from the 60s, who died suspiciously, like Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison and Janis Joplin. And
I was just fixing to say her.
Yeah. Well, at the time, the FBI's COINTELPRO was in full swing. And so basically what they were doing is they were doing a lot of surveillance on so-called political dissidents. And J. Edgar Hoover had an extreme disdain for many people in the rock industry because he thought they were anti-American and communist sympathizers. And so, a lot of those individuals who died an untimely death died of suspicious causes and not necessarily what the media reported. So, again, I would refer to that book, Covert War on Rock by Alex Constantine. It sort of dovetails what Adam was talking about in relation to some of the peculiar and curious deaths of some of these comedians.
It kind of reminds me, because just last week, I think it was the week before, I finished Nick Redfern's newest book, For Eyes Only, or No One's Eyes Only, And in that, he talks about Marilyn Monroe and her strange death and her affairs with the Kennedy brothers.
Oh, yeah.
And as I understand, it's suspected she had information that she really shouldn't have had, in other words.
Well, yeah, that's always been the rumor that there was pillow talk going on between JFK, and even RFK was involved on some level with Marilyn. And yeah, you hear a lot of stories too that it might have involved knowledge of, the Kennedys passed on knowledge about UFO disclosure and these type of things. You've heard these stories over the years, but
Marilyn Monroe was fixing to blow the whistle on what they knew.
Yeah, something to that effect. Definitely when you're having that much up close and personal time with somebody, especially the president, certain secrets may get shared.
Okay. Now, Ed, I was going to ask you also, what was it that spawned your interest in conspiracy theories? You especially, because you seem to have if you read your website, you seem to have a real passion for it.
We asking Ron or Adam?
No, Adam.
Yeah, there was a few things that got me going, interested in conspiracies and the paranormal. One was a psychedelic UFO encounter I had back in the day, but more with the conspiratorial stuff, there was a couple key things that really got me started down that path. One, I was in my early 20s, and sometimes they're just small little events that get you going. But I saw this was on a junior college campus, a sign said, did the CIA kill JFK? And this was back in the early 80s, and I'd never encountered that idea before, and that really got me knee-deep into JFK assassination research. Another guy who really got me interested back in the 1980 or so was Dick Gregory, who's been a conspiracy researcher, health advocate for years and years and years. In fact, he was one of the first people that helped bring the Zapruder film out and photos of the three tramps. And of course, Gregory, he was a comedian in the early 60s who got involved in the civil rights movement. But anyway, around 80 or so, I started listening to public radio, and they were featuring his lectures with a lot of mind-blowing materials, not only stuff on the different Kennedy assassinations, but that was some of the first time I heard crazy stories like John Belushi, for instance, was murdered as part of a conspiracy. And I talk about this in that article I did for Paranoia. Apparently, Belushi, around the time of his death, was looking into mysterious deaths in Hollywood, the death of William Holden and Natalie Wood, and he felt this was all connected in a way to the Reagan administration. William Holden was good friends and was, in fact, best man with Ronald Reagan's best man at his wedding. And William Holden died around this period, and Belushi was looking into this and a few other things, and that, according to Dick Gregory, Belushi's overdose was staged, and that he was really the victim of a conspiracy murder plot. And so, these are the type of ideas and things I was exposed to during that period. I was in my late teens and early 20s, so you just start looking into these things for yourself, and away you go. Right.
Yeah, I heard similar about Elvis Presley, that he really didn't do a drug overdose either.
Well, yeah, you look at Presley, there's that famous photo of him with Richard Nixon in the White House being all buddy-buddy, and now you hear different stories that that Elvis was a crazy, out-of-control drug addict, but then you've heard other stories that he was actually an agent of the DEA, and of course, to cover his tracks, they might have Elvis might have faked his own death. You hear a lot of those stories as well. That even with Jim Morrison of the Doors, that he perhaps faked his own death because he was involved in intelligence agency work of all things, and that he basically was leaving the doors and moving on to doing other things in his life. So, that basically created this death hoax to effectively, start a new identity. Much the same as you've heard stories about Elvis. Whether I believe that or have any hard evidence to prove any of that, I don't. But these are certainly interesting stories indeed.
Well, it's a funny thing that me and my kids have all talked about the fact that when it comes to conspiracies, it seems like although none of them can be proven, none of them can be actually debunked either. And, they all have got at least a certain amount of truth in them.
Yeah, that's one story I looked into, and I actually wrote about in Paranoia a few years back, where these rumors I heard that Tuesday Weld, the 1960s starlet actress, was actually an Illuminati high priestess who influenced the 60s counterculture and oversaw some type of conspiracy network, U.S. and internationally, which, at face value seems like a pretty bizarre, outlandish theory, but the more I looked into it, the more you could connect dots. And after I ran this story in Paranoia, I had more people contact me that had other information about Tuesday Weld, that, she might have been a mind control victim, or she was involved in some type of Illuminati-like cult. And so, once again, it's one of those stories you look into and you kind of press a sort of magic button that gets other people interested in it and contacting you. And, for instance, with the Tuesday Weld story, I think there's something at the core of that that resonates with people. There's some truth there, but like a lot of these, when you look into conspiracies and like mind control, for instance, there's a lot of disinformation as well to muddy the picture, to really cover up, and sometimes, in some cases, what's actually going on at the core of things.
Well, I think a lot of times that slinging mud for that disinformation is out there just to cause people to say, well, what do I believe? I mean, you get so many conflicting stories, it makes it a lot harder to tell.
Yeah, and I think that's happened in mind control research a bit. Going back, and Ron is much more well-versed than I am, but, the CIA back in the day, in the 50s, started their MK-Ultra program, which you mentioned earlier, and that evolved over the years. They started using drugs and hypnosis and other things, and in recent years, the last couple decades, you've heard about using different microwave devices and these type of things, and additional programs like the Monarch mind control program, and a lot of books came out about Monarch, and I think a certain measure of that was, at least from my perspective, was disinformation. Some of the more outlandish things, including shape-shifting reptilians and all this. Basically, those stories were planted to muddy the waters, discredit some of the true victims. Your thoughts on that, Ron?
Oh, yeah. Back in the early 90s, Mark Phillips and Kathy O'Brien came out with a lot of information regarding this trauma-based mind control program called Project Monarch. It's something I actually wrote about in the fall 1996 issue of Paranoia, an article called Project Monarch Nazi Mind Control. But anyway, Phillips and O'Brien started putting out quite a bit of information on Monarch programming, which essentially has to do with individuals who are traumatized to the extent of creating multiple personality disorder. And with each personality, there's a certain type of task or function.
Alrighty, I'm back. Hello.
For authors, filmmakers,
Hello.
entertainment, and all your listening needs.
He's doing the
Listen
intro.
now to Talk Now Radio, where no topic is taboo.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talk Now Radio. This is your host, Royce, the Redneck Radio Man. Joining me today is going to be Adam Gorightly and Ron Patton. And Adam Gorightly is the author of about 3 or 4 conspiracy books, one of them being Happy Trails to Weird Places, I believe, if I got the title correctly. And then Ron Patton owns Paranoia Magazine, which is a very popular magazine here on the internet that it's very easy to find. It's full of, actually...
Messaged Joan and said, hey, I was wondering if I could buy your mailing list because I want to put out a conspiracy magazine. And there were a few out like in the 90s. There was Steam Shovel Press and, a few others, but, like I said, they quit printing. So anyway, I just thought, wow, there's a niche for this kind of information. So Joan said, hey, well, why don't you just buy us out, since we're not really doing anything with it. And, they already have name recognition. They're pretty well known throughout the world. So I said, well, how much you want to sell it for? And they gave me a price, and I said, I think I can handle that. And the rest is history. So basically, I took over officially in
a bunch of information, and in all honesty, Adam Gorightly writes articles for Ron's magazine, in fact, and we're going to talk about some of their conspiracy theories that they've investigated and they wrote about, and I'm going to try to see if we can find out what's the newest word in the world of conspiracy today. So, Ron, Adam, how are y'all doing today?
Real good, Royce. Thanks for having us.
Well, I want to thank you guys for coming on to the show. In fact, Adam, I'll be honest, I was a little bit slow getting around to asking you. You friended me on Facebook, I think some 3-4 years ago, and I'm just now getting around to asking you. So,
asking you on the show, gotcha.
Well, I do apologize for that. I have so many guests coming and going, and I stay so far booked into advance that I don't have a lot of time to, invite a lot of extra people, in other words.
Hey, no problem.
So, at any rate, Ron, why don't you tell us real quick how you come about being the new owner of Paranoia Magazine and what led you to buy it and where you're going with it?
Well, I used to write for Paranoia several years ago, probably back in 1996. I have a friend by the name of Wendy Wallace who wrote a few articles for Paranoia, and she, sent me the magazine. I think this was like in the mid-90s, and I was just blown away. I'm going, wow, this is real conspiracy stuff. And, of course, they also have paranormal articles as well. But anyway, I sort of off and on wrote for Paranoia, and I have a really good rapport with Joan d'Arc and Al Haddell, the former owners of Paranoia. And actually, in 2009, they quit printing the hard copy magazine. As you well know, hard copy magazines are sort of like a dinosaur. They're just, many are falling by the wayside, in lieu of what's going on with the internet and the e-magazines, the digital format magazines. So anyway, they quit printing in 2009, and then they started putting out books, sort of on-demand books. And, I decided, what the heck, I was going to take a shot at putting out my own conspiracy magazine, and I was going to call it Conspirazine. And so I think this was back in 2011. I met